This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome to Balanced Debate for the Old North State. This week we discuss whether test results show we got our money's worth for spending $150 million on reading programs. We'll ponder an unusual visit this week by Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who came to Raleigh to talk about opioids. We'll examine how's the best way to update our state's criminal codes and whether some licensing laws need eliminating. And it wouldn't be NC Spin unless we asked the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of the panel, joining us this week include Rufus Edmisten, former Secretary of State, former Attorney General, Chris Fitzsimom, political analyst and columnist, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, and Phil Kirk, former chair of the State Board of Education, among many other titles. We're going to begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages by our underwriters.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Quality of life enjoyed by North Carolinians comes from the sacrifice of our state and local government retirees. These men and women risked their lives in times of danger. They taught our children, kept our neighborhoods clean, and protected the state's resources. They are North Carolina's silent heroes. The North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association proudly serves as the voice for more than 300,000 retirees across North Carolina. Our retirees deserve no less, and every day we stand by them.
Let's get to it. As we prepare for the short session of the legislature that will convene in 1 month, we know that in addition to adjusting the state budget, they're going to be tackling education issues, and one that will certainly be discussed includes the recent results of the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, test scores in reading. Since passage of the Read to Achieve program in 2011, our state spent more than $150 million in an effort to get more students reading proficiently by 4th grade. But the recent tests don't reflect much progress. North Carolina went from 34% proficiency in 2011 to 39% proficiency last year. Phil Kirk, a lot of people are asking, did we get our money's worth? They don't think we got a lot of progress after spending so much. What's your reaction?
Well, it's a very complex issue, as we all know. I don't know if we got our money's worth or not, but we got to continue the effort. Whether this is the right program or not, we may need to have an outside evaluation of it if we haven't already. We went up 5 points, as you pointed out. That's not good enough, but progress is slow, too slow, I would say, in education. A lot of it goes back to before the 4th grade or before the 3rd grade. My 5-year-old and 3-year-old grandchildren, every time I go see them, they meet me at the door with a book. They want me to read to them, and I wish that happened in every home. And now there are a lot of civic groups that are giving books to children of low income to take home for the summer and keep. So it's a complex issue. I don't know if we're teaching it the right way, but I think it's not just a government problem.
Well, some are questioning that, Rufus, because these same tests show that only 33% of our 8th graders, now 39% of 4th graders, 33% of our 8th graders are proficient in reading comprehension. That looks like we're going backwards, doesn't it?
Well, as an old teacher, 3rd grade, and I know that Phil taught high school, we know that the most important skill you have to have is being able to read. Even if you're addicted to Twitters and all that sort of stuff, you've got to be able to read. And it is an appalling situation, but I don't think you spend too much money on education. I don't think it's been wasted, and I think it all boils down to having a good teacher, and I still maintain that the most needed thing in our schools are teachers' aides.
John, you wrote a column about that very subject this week, and essentially what you said is that the old argument that we need to spend more money on education doesn't necessarily hold with this case.
Well, it doesn't necessarily hold. That's not an argument against spending more money if we figure out an effective way to do it, but I was just observing that we recognize this, and Phil was mentioning this earlier, that the scores on the national assessment or any other test is influenced by the quality of instruction, what happens in the classroom. It's also heavily influenced by family background, poverty status, whether English is your native language or not. So you have to read these data more carefully. The Urban Institute has a wonderful tool. Every time the NAEP scores come out, the Urban Institute has a tool that allows you to go in and adjust for poverty status and other factors. When you do that, North Carolina is one of the top performing school systems in the country. It's in the top,
Wow.
It's in the top 10 in almost every category, but so is Massachusetts, which is a very high spending state, and so is Indiana and Texas and Florida, which are very low spending states.
I don't know how reassuring that is, Chris. When you drill down with these numbers, what you find out is that just slightly more than half of the white, non-poor students achieved what they call proficiency levels. But then, if you get down to it, only 19% of black and 22% of Hispanics are reading proficiency. They don't look significantly better than what they have in past years. We're not doing something right here. What is it?
Well, I think we're focusing, and we long have, and it's understandable because it's the only way some people I think can think about this is that we're going to fix all this with schools, or we're going to fix all this with another program to send kids to summer school. And those are really important, and we need good teachers, and we need all those things. I think John referenced it, when you adjust for poverty, that's the dramatic phrase. When you adjust for poverty. The problem is low-income kids, kids from rural areas who don't have a lot of, not just rural areas are poor, but kids from low-income rural areas especially are having trouble. We know they're going to have trouble. And yet, I still think we have made mass miscalculations by punishing schools with the crazy grading system that even most Republicans now think is wrong. There's got to be a way to focus on these, give these kids incentives to help the teachers and help their families and figure out what they need when they come to school so they can be ready to learn when they're there. We talk all about that, but we've never really addressed it.
Phil, when you were chairman of the State Board of Education, we were dealing with these issues, and that was what, back in the 90s?
Yes,
We've known this for some time, but we really can't fix the socioeconomic problems in North Carolina.
We could talk about it, but we can't.
How can we don't have that kind of money.
We can't use it as an excuse. I've always said all children can learn. Some just take more resources, better teachers, but we don't give up on anybody. If we do, they're going to be in poverty the rest of their lives.
We have kids, I mean, no matter how great a teacher is, if a kid's head is down in class because his teeth are killing him, he or she's not going to learn. That's just one tiny example, but there's a lot of things like that we have to do.
And if they're hungry.
This is a critically important question, which we talk about a lot, and we need to really think this through carefully, because these are both correct statements. To say that some states have very high test scores and they have very low poverty, and that's one of the reasons they have high test scores, and North Carolina doesn't have as high test scores, in part because we have higher poverty, it's not an excuse. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying to push every student to excel, but it is an important explanation. Basically, we can draw entirely the wrong conclusion, entirely, if we look at test scores over time and see stagnant or even declining scores and ignore the fact that the populations have been changing dramatically. So every single subgroup could be going up and the average could stay the same. That means we're doing some things well, not that we're not doing things well. It means we're doing things well.
But we actually declined in math scores. Rufus, so far as it goes,
there was a change in test population.
Shouldn't we be a little concerned that only half or slightly more than half of the white, non-poor students are not doing well?
Yeah, something's wrong there. I understand all the economic situation and the human factors that Chris and Phil and John talk about. But when you have that population that has all advantages in life and something's not happening, somebody's not putting some discipline there. Part of learning to read is discipline. That, at least coming from an old third grade teacher. And there's nothing wrong with repetition either. We seem to think that every kid learning to read has got to do an analysis and why this and why that. Reading is reading. And something is very wrong.
And we grew up in an era when you read with Dick and Jane and Sally and Spot and Puff.
Oh, absolutely.
You remember that? Phil, so far as it goes, though, the U.S. education system traditionally, through the decades, through the ages, has been the best in the world. Recently, that's not the case anymore. The PISA test, the international test of 72 countries administered with 15-year-olds, show that we don't even rank in the top 20. As a matter of fact, we are 24th in reading, 25th in science, and 40th in math.
You've hit a hot button with me, and I don't mean to be defensive about it, but I've always said one of the main reasons in those international rankings that we don't do well is that our students, if they attend school every day, only go 180 days a year, and in most of those countries that you mentioned, they go 220 or 240. And anytime
and go from 7 a.m. until 4:30 and yeah.
we don't take education as seriously, and it is some about money, but it's also about attitudes. I remember there have been several times in the last 30 years when the state board or the legislature even tried to extend the school year by 3 days.
Yeah.
And other than the money factor, the parents were opposed to it.
Let's be very clear about this. On that PISA study, first of all, some people try to explain it away by saying, well, we test more kids. That's not true. But the main point is almost all of those countries spend less. They spend way less than we do on education.
But
they don't spend more.
They're also almost totally
They
homogeneous.
also have, a lot of those countries also have lower poverty rates, getting back to the original plan. If you adjust for that, the United States doesn't do nearly as bad.
No, still, but the point being that this is a global economy we're living in, and we are not going to succeed in the future with a mediocre education system.
Well,
would you agree to that?
You pay for democracy now. If you're in Japan, you know you're going to be in school all your life until you get up to be an adult. And we're paying for a democracy that allows people in local areas to do what they want to do. But reading is the basis of all knowledge, and that is why I'm
Phil
concerned.
Berger is right about one thing. Up to the third grade, you learn to read. From that point on, you read to learn.
And there are studies that show that if you can't read at grade level by third or fourth grade, it's a pretty good predictor that you're going to be in the dropout.
Chris, I want to pivot back to North Carolina for a minute because there's some issues we want to talk about here. The legislature comes back to town May 18th. Going to be a number of education issues they are going to be considering when they come back. One of them is school safety. Governor Cooper held a press conference this week in which he is recommending that we spend $130 million on school safety and mental health. 40 of that's for mental health assistance, 65 is for school safety. What's your opinion of his recommendations?
Well, I think it's a good start, and I think if there's ever a time where we're going to increase resources for both of those things, I don't think that's enough for mental health, and I think we still have dramatic problems in the mental health system overall. But I think this is a significant beginning, and I hope the General Assembly will respond. There is a feeling nationally. There was another shooting this past week. A gun went off. Somebody got shot in Florida again in the foot at school. Yeah. We've had teachers bring guns and they went off. We have to do something about guns. That's a whole other topic. But we have to do a lot more just about making our schools safer. And I think these are a good start.
Who was the legislator that said we're going to have blood on our hands if we don't arm every teacher?
Gentleman from Cabarrus County.
That's not the first unusual thing he said.
Well, I'll tell you what, that made my blood curdle, I'll have to tell you that. So the question is, do you think, John, the legislature is going to approve this $130 million, or is it going to get to another political fight?
I think the legislature will take action probably on both of those items. I don't know that they'll fund the exact amounts or in the same way the governor has proposed it. I noticed that what lawmakers said when they heard about this was, well, we would like to see his entire budget, which is understandable because they want to understand how that fits into the broader set of proposals he's going to be making to the General Assembly.
I think there's a broad approach to it, and I looked in there and some of the mechanics of having door locks.
Better door locks.
All kinds of things in there. It's a good mixture.
And so far as it goes, we do need to do this. I'm not sure I think arming teachers is the right solution. Do you, Phil?
No, and I don't think that's even being seriously considered now.
Really?
Yeah. I think there's
being talked about.
It's being considered around the country.
There are states that have had armed teachers for many years.
I don't think it's going to happen in North Carolina.
Speaking about considerations, there was a lot of talk about dividing up some of these larger school districts and making them smaller. I think people particularly were looking at Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, Wake County schools, some of these big systems like that. That talk seems to have died down, Rufus. Is that a dead subject?
I hope so, because the folks that want less government, why create more? And on the whole, the systems they're talking about, it's a political question to them. Wake and Mecklenburg County systems seem to be doing rather well to be so large, and so why mess up a good thing?
Well, and they have districts. I don't know about Mecklenburg, but in Wake County they have divided into districts, and they have district area. I think they call them district superintendents. Yeah. But there's a model where they've been broken up within the same overall system.
And it's important to the viewers to know there was a study committee on this, and they heard a lot of testimony, and basically chaired by a Republican who I think favors breaking them up.
Right.
And they came to the conclusion that it's not a good idea at this point to break them up. So this wasn't a hastily made decision by either side.
And some of us remember when we had 175 school districts, and now we're down to 115.
And we worked like the devil to try to get them consolidated down to what we got now.
I will suggest that it is still inevitable that Wake and Mecklenburg school districts will at some point be broken up. They're simply too large for the standard school district around the country. They're too expensive. When you get above a certain size, it's more expensive to run school districts that have 150,000 students in them. We will end up breaking them up, but the academic effects are unclear. This is mostly a management question.
Right. Phil, another issue that is going to come before the General Assembly this year is how to fund schools. And they've talked about funding formulas and so forth, but there was an interesting case that came before our state Supreme Court this past week. Halifax County, which has 3 systems in the county, as you well remember, a group of parents are suing, saying that the county commissioners are not funding each of these 3 systems equally, and they want the court to force them to do it. Now, the county's saying the problem lies with the General Assembly in funding. What can you tell us about this case?
I don't think those 3 systems will ever be merged unless they're forced to be. I don't think politically they're going to be merged, so I think it would take a court case to do it. There's never enough money. Halifax has a very low tax base, and I doubt they are funding them equally. So I think the parents had a right to do that.
All right, I want to pivot over to our next topic. We can't blame anybody in the federal government for wanting to get out of Washington, especially if you're our beleaguered Attorney General Jeff Sessions. He came to Raleigh this past week to talk about opioids and what the federal government proposed to do to help rein in the crisis in our nation. Sessions said a crowd the size of one that would fill Carter Finley Stadium, some 58,000 people, dies each year in our country over opioid abuse, and in our state, 3 people a week die from it. John, this was a very interesting event. Attorney General Sessions had been in South Carolina earlier in the day to talk about immigration and border control. This conversation, a 30-minute press conference in which there was no question and answer afterwards, got very little press. First of all, why did the Attorney General, and not the Secretary of Human Services, come talk to us about opioids?
Well, the leadership in the Health and Human Services Department is in transition, is in flux. So
isn't everything in Washington in transition?
But I think, first of all, Jeff Sessions has been interested in this issue for years, even when he was a U.S. Senator, before he became Attorney General. There are obviously law enforcement aspects to the issue, so I understand all that. I think the reason why Jeff Sessions being in Raleigh didn't get more attention is because all reporters would have wanted to ask him about was the president and the Comey book and the Mueller investigation. That's all anybody would have asked him about.
No question, but he really didn't have that much to say. I mean, he said that his proposal was we were going to limit how many drugs the pharmaceutical company could make, painkiller drugs. Is that any kind of solution, Chris?
No, but I mean, we have to address it at all facets. I mean, I do think there are pharmaceutical companies, right, are hawking these drugs. Some doctors are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. My big concern with Attorney General Sessions is since he's been sworn in, he's talked about a lot of drug laws from a law enforcement perspective and not a disease or addiction perspective. It's very complicated, and I think we can't do it without a broad range of solutions, and I'm not sure he realizes that.
Rufus, when we first started talking and hearing about this opioid addiction problem, the conversation primarily focused on doctors prescribing, too easily prescribing painkillers and for too long a period of time. Do you think it was right to put the doctors in the spotlight?
Well, the doctors were accused before the opioid crisis of not alleviating pain, of not fulfilling their oath of office as a doctor. And so I think part of the problem is there, but the main problem is that when you look at 60 Minutes and you see one little town in Kentucky had tens of thousands of pills, something's wrong. And now on Jeff Sessions, you know, he came up with that foolishness the other day about putting people to death. You know, that same old stuff where you're demagoguing about this thing. There's no place.
The drug sellers.
Yeah,
drug dealers.
Put the drug dealers to death. You know, we've been through that before. That the so-called drug wars don't work. You better get down to the basics of doctors and folks that take care of people.
But Phil, the Center for Disease Control says in North Carolina there are 97 prescriptions for every 100 people in our state. And they say they're largely for OxyContin and Vicodin, both of which contain fentanyl. Not only do they kill the pain, but they can get the patient to become addicted to them if they've taken them too long. So how do we make sure our patients get proper pain management without having to get them addicted?
If I knew the answer to that, I'd become a consultant in that area. But not to be facetious about it, none of us like to be in pain. I know my mother got up to 13 prescriptions from her doctor, who every time she would call, he'd just write another prescription, and we had to get her another doctor to get her off those drugs. So I don't know the answer to that question. It's a tough one. How do you mandate, in effect, human behavior? How do you legislate?
Blue Cross Blue Shield thinks they have the answer, John. They've decided that they're going to limit the payment for opioid prescriptions to 7 days. What do you think of that idea?
Well, that might be worth a try. I think Phil's right about this. We want to alleviate pain. That's part of what our system is designed to do, is to alleviate this desperate pain that people suffer. On the other hand, we have these risks of addiction. I don't think this is a law enforcement matter primarily. I think it's a matter of personal and family interaction. It's a spiritual crisis to some extent.
Yes.
And yes, we do need to think through how we manage and how we pay for pain medication when it is so obviously abused.
You know, DHS Secretary Mandy Cohen, who I think is a bright star in North Carolina, we're glad to have her, talks about the fact that she thinks a lot of the problem has to do with the black market and people selling these drugs illicitly.
Well, and that's the other effect of limiting the prescriptions. I mean, if you give somebody a 60-day supply and they're off pain after 15 days, they sell them and try to make money. She also talks a lot about treatment, and she's been going to places where people have kicked this addiction, which is another thing we have to keep investing in. This addiction is a disease, just like this is equivalent to alcoholics. We have to figure out a way to help them. They have to help themselves, but they also need help doing it.
Well, Attorney General Sessions did say, Rufus, that there was money available for drug treatment. Our legislature, on the other hand, keeps saying, no, they're not so much. We can't do that. We gave them $10 million to help them come up with, what is it, the opioid drug, naloxone, something like that. They've just refused to give money for treatment facilities.
I think it's a big matter of coordination. You've got to say, all right, who's going to do the treatment, who's going to do the prevention, and who's going to handle the law enforcement. Then they all got to know what one another's doing, and apparently that does not happen right now.
And these treatment, I mean, the naloxone, they've got the EMTs have this. If you're in an overdose situation, they can give you this drug and it'll bring you back. But it's not a long-term solution so far as that's concerned. Phil, do you think the general public is really aware of how big a problem this is in our state?
As of a year ago, no, but based on things I hear and read and all the things that people are having at the local level with like town hall meetings and so on, I'd say we're much better educated than we were. Is that everybody educated on it? No, and I don't guess they ever will be. But it's much better now than it was.
Particularly in our classrooms. We need more education, I think, with our younger people. Yeah, all right. Well, we come to the time of the show now, which everybody tells me is their favorite time of the show, in which we ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimom, I'll start with you.
Well, Governor Cooper has received a lot of criticism recently from Republicans for not spending money on affordable housing, hurricane relief money. What's been left out of a lot of the stories is the General Assembly did away with funding for community development corporations. They cut the money for legal aid. They transferred the whole responsibility from the Department of Commerce to the Department of Emergency Management. Nobody there was used to doing this. So part of the reason it has taken so long to distribute this money is the General Assembly, A, cut the budget and eliminated people who were on the ground who knew how to do it, and B, they moved it to a department that had no expertise doing it. And I'm disappointed that's not in more of the stories.
Rufus Edmisten, tell us something we don't know.
Well, in 1727, when Ben Franklin was 21 years old, he became the inventor of the chat room. I read in his autobiography the other day that he was worried about incivility in the political body, and we weren't even a country yet. So he formed a chat room where...
Were you in that chat room?
I was in there.
Where is Ben Franklin when we need him?
I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, I got you.
So he's the father of the chat room.
All right, Phil Kirk, tell us something we don't know.
Baseball, college baseball is now warm enough to go to the games. North Carolina has 4 teams in the top 11 in the country. North Carolina State is ranked number 2 in the country. Carolina, Duke, and East Carolina are all in the top 11. NC State plays those 3 teams 7 times in the next week. So
you gotta love it.
Yeah, it's much better than all this politics stuff we keep
John
talking
Hood,
about.
tell us something we don't know.
Well, we don't have the numbers yet for the April tax filings, but so far this year, North Carolina's general fund revenue is about $300 million above forecast. If you add in some unspent money, we've got about a $600 million cash surplus right now as we speak. Naturally, all the spending lobbies in Raleigh are, licking their chops, trying to figure out how to spend it. We do need to spend some of it. We need to be careful because a recession is still possible in the near term.
And that's going to be the big debate in this short session.
It is.
What do we do with the surplus? Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read my weekly column, which, by the way, is talking about these NAEP test scores this week, so be sure to read it. Join NC Spin on Facebook or NC Spin on our website. And next week, we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until that time, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Quality of life enjoyed by North Carolinians comes from the sacrifice of our state and local government retirees. These men and women risked their lives in times of danger. They taught our children, kept our neighborhoods clean, and protected the state's resources. They are North Carolina's silent heroes. The North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association proudly serves as the voice for more than 300,000 retirees across North Carolina. Our retirees deserve no less, and every day we stand by them.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.